Good afternoon, everyone. A story to tell your grandchildren. In the beginning, as we look back in history, say 100 years from now, the story would be told as something like global carbon emissions with CO2 were going to be the driver of climate into infinity, which would end the human race on the planet. They even broke everything down into carbon dioxide forcing, methane forcing, and every other type of climate driver that there could be. Relative forcing, they listed it all, and the percentages of how much watts per square meter forcing there would be planet-wide, yet all of the IPCC models really didn't reflect reality. The real global temperatures were far below what the models were showing, and even it got so far where they were talking about unnatural runoff on the Greenland ice sheet called spongy ice that they couldn't even quantify yet. They were using this for reasons of loss of ice. And then that didn't work so much to scare the people, so they had to move over to methane, saying that it trapped 100 times more heat. And looking at the Arctic Circle map, they were showing you exactly where methane feedback loop would melt, and then it would melt more permafrost, which would go into an infinity, and we would literally melt half the planet, which would release way more gases and turn this place into Venus. And they kept using such phrases as near-record wildfires, talking about the Alaskan permafrost. News crews from the BBC even went up there, visiting the time tunnel dug out, where you can see how there used to be forests, which are now covered by tundra. Nice graphs came out showing the different variances of CO2 and the effect of methane and the effect of nitrous oxide on the planet's atmosphere. Wonderful articles, methane versus carbon dioxide, almost like a Monday night fight to watch. Which greenhouse gas is going to battle it out for the number one scary spot on the planet? Numbers of gigatons. And it's accelerating the Arctic permafrost melt. And then beyond even blaming ourselves for warming the planet with CO2, and they had to blame the animals as well. Even the forest, they blamed the forest for outgassing. Natural fires and lightning caused forest fires, grassland fires, all blamed on everything. And it was repeated in the media so much, permafrost melting, and nice beautiful charts from Environmental Defense Fund showing methane has more potent greenhouse gas warming than CO2. And 25% of all man-made global warming was due to methane emissions. Cornell University respected institutions of learning would come out with parroting the same methane, permafrost. It got to the point where even pumpkins from our greatest celebration holidays of Thanksgiving in the United States and Halloween planet-wide, now we were to blame because we wanted to celebrate our holidays by carving pumpkins. We would only eat the inside and make pies from them, but the outside that we would carve into faces as a tradition to keep ghosts away at night was now blamed for global warming. Even though the information clearly showed that this was a repeating cycle of the extreme U.S. hot temperature months from 1920s mimics what was going on in the 1980s. Global temperatures decreased, yet the narrative in the news wasn't scary enough, so they came out with a new scarier gas, the scariest super gas that was a threat to life on planet Earth, hydroflurocarbons. They used American politicians to spread the word. Environmental websites would call it a super greenhouse gas. It is so far beyond greenhouse gases. It is a super greenhouse gas. Yet one of the problems people pointed out when they did research on this was hydrofluorocarbons have less than 1% of all the forcing of CO2. The IPCC models have been wrong so far, so if you're taking something that's 1% less than something that's already wrong, how much damage would that really do? And they started to blame all the industries for hydrofluorocarbon production, such as refrigerators, which we use to keep our meats cool so we don't get sick, and we don't get botulism, and diseases that killed millions and millions of people earlier in the history of the earth. Yet somehow this is unsafe now. The gas from the refrigerator is more dangerous than your rotting meat that you're going to eat and make you sick. The industries that produce our silicon microchips Everything that we needed for our mobile phones, everything that we needed for our computers, our satellite systems were all now to blame for the warming on the planet. We really don't need computers anymore because we're all going to fry in a Venus-type atmosphere, so just don't even buy anything anymore. But the advertisers didn't like that message, so they're conflicting messages through the media. Don't buy. It's bad for the environment. Oh, no, it's on sale. Buy extra. Buy two now. This confused the public greatly. Also, another confusing factor was over 25 years, these HFCs only rose 80 million tons, which was 3.2 million tons per year. And a lot of people were asking, how can 3.2 million tons of a gas and gigatrillion tons of atmospheric gas have any effects? IPCC, the leading proponent of global warming, didn't even have this listed in their own records as a gas that could affect the environment. All the climate drivers compared never had this gas until 2015 and 16 when they started to trickle it in because methane was not scary enough. And because the leadership of the world knew that global cooling was going to start this year in 2016-17 winter, they kept putting out the messages of the grand solar minimum will be overridden by the effects of all of our CO2, methane, and hydrofluorocarbon warming. It would stave off an entire ice age for 100,000 years. Yet the sun began its decreased activity state 3 years ahead of time, sputtering, stalling, 4 separate instances in a single month, which was years ahead of where the sun's solar decline in activity in the regular cycle should begin. Russian scientists, American NASA advisors, climate scholars, video makers, we're all talking about how the grand solar minimum was upon us and we must begin changing our food growing techniques. Yet the message was, don't listen to that, it's going to continue to warm. So nobody got ready in time. A few people were ready. Chapter 2 is next. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. You can clearly see how there's been a bait and switch throughout your entire lifetime. If you're 50 years old, this makes sense to you. If you're 40 years old, this makes sense to you. Those of you who are 20 years old and under, you have not seen the entire bait and switch narrative that has been going on since the 1970s. You've been born straight into the full brainwash machine. Yet those of us a bit older have seen the bait and switch. This is the last bait and switch they can put in place before the cooling begins this winter. You definitely need to have a plan B. You need to know how to grow your own food. You need to know how to store your own food, jarring, canning, dehydrating. And you're going to need to get together with your community and figure out how you're going to share resources, pool your talents, pool your skills, pool your knowledge so everybody can get the greatest benefit from what we've learned up to this point.